Hello and welcome to Shape the System, where we find and tell the stories that help people to rethink the way the world works. We interview people from all over the world who are helping to change our systems for the better. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures, who help ambitious founders and their teams scale up for success. More about KPMG High Growth Ventures after the interview. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Ahoy, ahoy, everyone. Welcome back to the show. I don't know what episode we're up to. Maybe it's 115. We're in the hundreds. That always feels good. We've spoken a little bit about, how do we feed people and do it in a way that doesn't destroy the place we also live in, the planet, before, but maybe not to this extent. And I think this is the first time we've really kind of dove into this topic. And I'm probably going to ask a bunch of stupid questions today, but we're going to be talking about agriculture, but more specifically livestock. And we're going to be joined by Tom Williams from Number8 Bio and find out all about what they do. But before we dive into the problem space and understand a little bit more about agriculture and specifically the livestock industry, welcome to the show, Tom. Just wanted to get a little bit of background from you, just how you arrived to be working on this problem, a little bit about your history, I guess, and then we can dive straight in.
Yeah, thanks, and great to be here. So I'm Tom Williams. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Number8 Bio. We prevent methane emissions from cattle and sheep and make them grow faster. But my background is actually as an academic microbiologist. So before I co-founded Number8 Bio, I was a senior lecturer at Macquarie University, a university here in Sydney, and I led a team of about 17 people doing all sorts of crazy research in the field of synthetic biology. So I was involved in a project aimed at completely re-engineering and synthesizing the yeast genome, 12 million base pairs of DNA, and bringing that to life. I worked on engineering yeast to grow on non-sugar carbon sources that are more sustainable, like methanol, which can be derived from CO2 and methane. And I did a lot of strange things, but I grew up in a little town in New Zealand in a big dairy farming region called the Waikato, and I was always really well aware of the problem of methane emissions that come from animals like cows. And as I became more experienced in science, I realized that the nature of that problem is a microbiology one. So I was at the same time slowly getting disillusioned with academia and feeling I wasn't having the impact that I wanted to have with my life in that context, and knew that I had the chance at having a competitive edge in this, what I saw as the most impactful thing I could possibly work on because of the microbiology aspect of it.
Yeah, and I actually have a follow-on question on that, because what you just touched on was you did some research around yeast and sugars and creating alternative types of fuels, all of which play into the higher order problem that, around emissions that you're now solving or looking to solve with Number8 Bio. So, why this and not them? What was it that you understood about that space or commercial opportunity or the molecular biology that meant this was the better thing to jump ship into?
That's a really good question. The field that I was in had some big waves of progress and investment and some spectacular failures as well, which I wasn't directly part of. I was an academic in that space, but, I was kind of coming up in the world during the first wave of biofuels, for example, where people were trying to engineer things like algae and yeast to make jet fuel. So I saw that kind of rise and crash and burn. And then there was another wave of synthetic biology where people were engineering microbes to do all sorts of things, which is now just also again crashed as well. So it's not that I didn't see the promise of that field or the impact of it, but that for me, the value proposition for the climate was difficult to scale and less direct than it was in the case of methane emissions. So I'm not sure if we want to go there at the moment, but these emissions from cows are 6% of all climate change, and it's wasted energy from the animal's feed as well. So there's just such a direct connection to productivity and profitability there. That wasn't really the case.
The reason I'm laughing, sorry, is that I've never heard anyone refer to the flatulence of cows to be a wasted energy opportunity.
Yeah,
there's another way to look at it.
Sadly, it's burps. I think about 5% is farts and the rest is burps.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for clarifying that. That was one of my later questions. Good. Okay, well, that's interesting. And so, it wasn't that the science was wrong on the other stuff. It was just that the ability to actually get it to the point where it would have the impact that you saw that it could have would not have been as big or as direct or as clear as what you've now gone into.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah, okay, wonderful. That's really interesting. The other reason I bring it up is because I think a lot of really interesting science comes out of a lab. Like we've had a few chats on this show with people who've either commercialized or been part of actually the R&D and then left the R&D scheme to do it. And for someone to be in the R&D in the space and say, actually, I'm leaving all that behind and I'm going to go and solve a different problem that's maybe related to but not directly part of the R&D that I was doing inside academia is a really interesting pathway.
Yeah, well, I can add a bit of colour to that actually, because it's not quite like that. We actually founded the company wanting to use my core skill set in synthetic biology. And the reason for that is we'd noticed that seaweed works really well when you feed it to cattle to reduce their methane emissions. But seaweed is expensive to grow and difficult to scale up. So we thought, why don't we take the genes out of seaweed and engineer them into baker's yeast, which is scalable and inexpensive, so that the same active molecules are produced. So we actually did have a synthetic biology and a yeast angle in Number8 Bio's early days. But we eventually found that still would cost too much. In this space, you really have to be able to commercialize for 10 to 20 cents per head per day. And we weren't going to be able to do that with yeast, even if we invoked 7 million litre scale bioreactors from the bioethanol industry and things like this. So that, and then we found that potential customers didn't like the active ingredient that comes from seaweed as well. So we had to pivot completely away from it after having already raised nearly $2 million, which we have successfully done.
Okay, interesting. Okay, well, we'll get to the solution a bit later on. So let's start with kind of understanding the problem. And I'm going to frame it in an interesting, not an interesting way, but I'm going to kind of come at it as like right up front, everyone's saying, okay, well, there's, 100% of CO2 or greenhouse emissions, if you want to, use the more holistic term, and burps, and as we've now discovered, and farts, obviously, from ruminants. I'm assuming it's not just cows; it's anything that's
right.
Multiple stomachs. Yep, cool. A part of it, but I want to frame it in this term that you use a lot on your website. This idea of livestock efficiency, because this seems to talk to a broader problem. Help us understand what that term is in the context of both the environmental impact, but also the nature of the animal actually growing on the land.
Yes. So the efficiency that we're referring to means how much feed goes in and how much animal product comes out, basically. So in the case of cattle, for example, it's how much grass or grain are they eating and how much weight are they putting on each day. In the case of dairy, it's how much grass or grain are they eating and how much milk and of what quality are they producing per day. So that's the efficiency, and that drives a lot of that's all of agriculture and its goals, basically, at least for the producers. So yeah, and it's really an interesting process in that cattle and sheep are not like other animals in that they are not digesting their food using their bodies. They're actually walking fermentation tanks. So they have a community of billions of microbes in their stomachs that allow them to consume things that people can't, like grass and the woody bits of grain, for example. So yeah, that reaction that happens in that fermentation is not perfect. It releases the nutrients that the animal needs to grow, but it also has a wasteful byproduct in the form of methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. So you've got a greenhouse gas that's 28-fold more potent than carbon dioxide, but also breaks down far more quickly over 20 years rather than 100. And it's just burped out nutrition that they otherwise could have used to grow faster. So it's just a compelling problem space to work in.
Yeah, there's like multiple angles to it. Part of the thing that I was interested in here, though, is right now my diet would be omnivore, but limited meat. And but for quite a while I was completely vegetarian. My motivations for doing so were primarily land efficiency, right? And they were like how much energy and how much land and how much water and how much resources generally does it take to produce this amount of caloric input, protein related, whatever the measures are. And it just felt to me like there was other ways to do it. I guess the thing that I'm trying to understand is how much of this, livestock efficiency is a factor in whether you can shift the dial on this stuff. Like if land use is 80% of it, you can get it down to 70% by making them a little more efficient, but it's still using massive swathes of land. Is this really addressing that problem, or it's addressing the fact that if people want meat and the demand's there, we should make this process while we operate this today more efficient in the way it does operate, noting that there may be even more efficient ways to generate meat in the future that aren't using land?
Yeah, that's a really interesting set of questions. For me, we're definitely driven by the second one more, and that there is demand for these products. Therefore, they should be made as efficiently and sustainably as possible.
Yeah.
The other stuff, I'm not really an expert in, like in terms of the impact of the land use and water use, and other things that go into agriculture. So that would be stepping a little bit outside of my lane. But my general thoughts on that are that it's very complicated and nuanced. It's not always the case that ruminants are consuming land and resources that would be used for anything else that's useful. It sometimes is the case, but I don't think it always is. So yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I think it's like I'm always some of the things we've observed over this show the last 5 or so years is that the technologies that tend to take hold are not supplanting the entire value chain. They're plugging into and making the existing value chain more efficient because you can add them to what you already do, as opposed to having to completely replace the status quo. And so if there is land and there are cows on it, and you can make those cows, 10, 15% more efficient from a livestock efficiency perspective, then they're faster to grow, or they grow bigger for the same amount of inputs, same amount of water, whatever, then that is actually a bigger lift in the short term than holding out for nuclear fusion, to use a parallel.
Yeah, indeed. I'm bullish on nuclear fusion at the moment, but that's another topic.
Sure.
So,
we can go down the rabbit hole if you want.
Look, I view this from my own two eyes in some ways, and that I'm hyper aware of climate change and the negative impacts that it could have on our civilization. But I also continue to consume very large quantities of meat and milk. So, I'm not unaware of the environmental impact of that, but have still decided consciously to keep doing that. And I just think that so many people are the same, and that the way that we consume food is quite cultural and quite historical and quite ingrained in our ways of life. And it's, in my opinion, very important that we address those emissions head on and not bank on some alternate system developing in time.
Yeah, and look, it's an interesting take, because I think when we think about what will it take for something to become the status quo, you have to look at where the change is required, right? There's a behavioural change, regulatory change, economic motivations. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the economics of this later, because it's super interesting. But if the solution to, high single-digit percentage of all emissions globally are coming from the fact that people consume meat, and that this is the output of that, or the net result of that, saying, well, if everyone just stopped eating meat, we'd be fine, is not a solution.
That's
right.
So
you can't take that approach.
That's right. People have had that option for hundreds of years, and they haven't taken it up on mass. If anything, it's going the other way, right? We have large parts of the developing world coming into the middle class, and they demand more protein when they do that typically. So, we need to make, I forget the figures, it's like 70% more protein for 10 billion people by 2050. We've got to do that without stuffing everything up on Earth.
Okay, just on top of all the other things that are happening. Perfect.
Exactly.
Now let's talk about fusion. Okay, cool. Just as a side note, and I know you said you didn't want to go outside of your lane, but I do want to understand, because I think there's a tendency to, and even I've been guilty of this, to demonise livestock and to demonise that as a way of generating calories, and nutrition. And we've had plenty of farmers and agri-related businesses on this show to talk about various aspects of that, but never in the context of livestock. When you encounter this, and again, taking a broader view, can you help articulate the positive relationship between livestock and the environment generally, even though there is these problems that we're going to talk about?
Yeah. So I think, there's a lot to be said about probably soil carbon and grazing systems, and how that naturally stores carbon there and can be harnessed. There's a lot to be said about upcycling of nutrition. Like I was saying before, humans can't eat grass, but cows can. Even with grain, you're turning a relatively low value form of food from starch into high value protein that's filled with vitamins and things like that. So yeah, cows are really good upcyclers. They turn low value nutrients into high value nutrients, but obviously there's a mass loss between those two steps, which is unavoidable with physics.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Energy's got to go somewhere.
Yeah, that's right. But yeah, look, I think it's just I really love farmers. They're so pragmatic. They love the land. Most farmers really take on this idea of custodianship super seriously. Like, they want to leave the place better than when they found it. They want to have their land a very healthy, productive system. And if they can do something for the environment, then they typically will. The issue that farmers have is that they're usually price takers. Their margin squeezed by where they get their feed and their supplies from, and where their animals go to, the processors. And they work in these global companies from either side in the supply chain, and they really do it tough sometimes. So, I'm driven by the climate, but I'm also driven to help them improve their livelihoods and their land at the same time, while making things that people continue to demand.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, well, now that we understand a little bit more about this challenge, and look, this is not an Australian, like the cows here and the cows in Guatemala are all doing the same thing, presumably.
Yeah.
But we'll focus on Australia. And I'm assuming that this emissions challenge is the same in all most developed countries, where there is there's an economic reality, there's a desire to want to do better, there's a land management concern, and there's a productivity drive. And so all of the conditions that are true here are true anywhere else. Let's talk a bit about the number 8 bio innovation. Let me understand that and give us the arc of, you talked a little bit right up front, but give us a little bit more about how we arrived at these particular things in the molecular biology.
Yeah, for sure. So I come from a field where we had to perform extraordinary feats of engineering with a very complex system. So life is made of thousands of different genes. Even within a single microbial species like yeast, you've got thousands of genes, thousands of enzymes, thousands of metabolites, all interacting together in ways that are incompletely understood, highly complex. And life has its own objective, which is to replicate and reproduce and survive, right? So when you try and engineer a living system like that, it's really bloody hard. So I guess flash forwards to Number 8 Bio. We've founded the company to engineer yeast to make bromoform, the active ingredient in seaweed. We achieved that technologically, got it to work pretty much as well as it ever could, and then have abandoned that because we thought it was not as scalable and expensive as it needed to be for that to be a successful product, and there was negative sentiment towards that molecule and some potential customers.
Yeah.
So we'd reached that point, and we have this philosophy of life is complex and it's difficult to engineer. And one of the best ways to get around that issue is to have as many shots on goal as you possibly can. Just have as many ideas, screen as many different things, measure as many different things from that system as you can to find the needle in the haystack. So we actually set up a unique screening system that's partly automated and a bit smaller than what's normally done, where we get stomach fluid from a live animal and we bring it into the lab, and you put it in a little glass bottle, and you feed that fluid grass or grain, just like a cow would normally eat. And the microorganisms in the fluid will break down the feed just like they would in the cow, and they will produce nutrients just like the cow would normally have, and they produce methane just like the cow normally would. So it's the perfect little test system for different products like we're trying to make, which decrease methane emissions and increase the nutrients provided to the cow. So at the time that we were making this big pivot, we had the system just being set up, and we really just fired it up. We did about 5,000 of them in the course of just over a year. And we looked at every conceivable product that we could come up with, spanning enzymes, peptides, probiotics, small molecules, natural extracts, combinations of these things, different concentrations of these things, and really found the needle in the haystack. We then took that same philosophy through live animal studies, where we've seen really impressive results. We looked at about 40 different products from live animals, and the highlights from that are that what we've now settled on is the leading product, which is a organic molecule that the cows have to eat 1 to 2 grams of per day. We've seen emissions reductions of between 50 and 90%. We've seen really good early signs of a productivity uplift. So feed conversion efficiency increased, milk components increased. And we're now formulating this special ingredient to be delivered to grazing animals, so that it's not just for feedlots and grain-based diets. So that's the story arc of the technology and the screening process and how we got here. How it actually works is it's an inhibitor of a process called methanogenesis, which is done in some microbes in the rumen, which make methane. So the molecule binds to some of those enzymes and prevents them from working, which then prevents the methane being made. what happens then is that the resources in the rumen that those methanogens were consuming become available for other microbial groups who can direct them not towards methane, but instead towards nutrition for the animal. So we knock out a wasteful reaction and we promote a productive reaction in the rumen fermentation.
I have a question. I have a few questions, actually. Firstly, what are metabolites?
Yeah, metabolites are chemicals that life use to be life.
Amazing. That's unbelievably esoteric, but yes, okay. Good. Stuff inside the cell that's important for life, I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. But sorry, is it something the cell generates, or is it something that is available to the cell that comes into the cell as an externality? Like what? How do they show up?
Both. So they're the reactants and products of chemical reactions in living systems, typically involving enzymes. So most enzymes are converting, one or two chemicals into one or two other chemicals. And that's how life works.
Wonderful. And then the second question was more around this process thing. So when you came in and said, look, we want to have as many shots on goal, I think was the word you used.
Yep.
The idea of, extracting the stomach fluid, I think was the term that you used, from 5,000 different animals, or individually, presumably, or you did 5,000 tests of 5,000 different things. So presumably you got a lot of stomach fluid from a lot of different animals individually. Firstly, how are you doing that? Is it a vet getting something out? Is it someone putting a pipe down? How are you actually doing that?
Yeah, it's a fascinating process. So, we definitely didn't need 5,000 animals because the average rumen size is something like 100 litres, and the test that we do only require 5 millilitres. So, not heaps of fluid. But how it works is a lot of research facilities have animals with a portal into their rumen, like a hole basically that you can stick your hand in if you're a vet or a researcher and pull out some of the fluid.
Into the animal?
Yeah. They have a portal in their stomach basically, so you can access the rumen fluid, and they're otherwise going happily about their days.
Yeah, amazing. Sorry, someone put that portal in, or that's just the nature?
Yeah. So that's right. A vet surgically puts that portal in, and then they're used for research. So all done under ethics committee approval and stuff like that.
Yeah, and then I guess my related question was like, if you're looking at the way things react inside a 5 milliliter thing of stomach fluid, but conceivably it would vary over the course of the day, the course of the week between animals.
Yep.
So what was the challenge in trying to triangulate what might work, given that you had a moving target in some respects?
Yeah, for sure. So in that system I described, that's our high-throughput screening system. It's very far from resembling an actual cow, of course. This is like a glass vial in the lab.
Right.
But you can tune it so that you get reasonable outputs from it that you might expect from an animal. So that one is more of a yes-no. Does it work or not? Is it worth testing in animals at all? And to hone in on the likely dose for an animal trial, so you can reduce the scope of that and make it more efficient. But we actually invented another system where we do more accurately model an actual rumen, and we do that using bioreactors that have much larger volumes of fluid and where the conditions are controlled much more precisely, and we're getting
humidity, heat.
Yeah, and we're getting really incredible data from that. We're able to more accurately model what happens in an actual cow, and it's been a huge breakthrough for us.
And is there, not to jump to the obvious, but is there an element of this that once you start to, put telemetry on this kind of virtualized, physical, but organic, not whatever what you'd call it, manufactured stomach ruminant, that you end up with enough data to understand how these things might model in a computer system generally? Is it trending towards having a system that you might be able to model this stuff digitally and then go and do it in the lab after the fact?
Yes, that is partly where we're heading with this. We're collecting as much data as we can from all of these reactors, and we're looking to train models to be as predictive as possible of live animal study outcomes. But the innovation that we have so far is more along the lines of how do you control the conditions of that physical process to make it accurate.
Right, absolutely, yeah, okay. So it's more about saying this is great, but the animals all have to move to Cuba where it's 38 degrees in the shade, before the reaction's going to work. Like if there's a heat-related thing.
Oh no, it's more how do we make this So a bioreactor is just a glass vessel in the lab where you control the inflow and
Yeah.
outflow of liquids and
Mhm.
the pH and the temperature and that type of thing. So it's more like
Yeah.
how do you set that up so that it closely resembles your typical cow?
The reality. Okay,
Yeah.
wonderful. And then the other question that I had was going into this, because you came into this with an arc of hey, there's an emissions problem, we could solve the emissions problem.
Yep.
Was it a happy accident that you discovered the efficiency coming out of solving the emissions problem, or going into it you're like, mathematically, if we resolve this, we're probably going to this number's going to go up while this number goes down? Like, how did that knowledge come about?
No, we did a lot of customer discovery in the early days to try and understand if there was a market for methane mitigation, which with farmers there is not at the moment, but there is for the productivity uplift. Like I was saying,
Yeah.
they're really price squeezed from both sides, and any efficiency gain can really affect their profitability positively. So
Yeah.
we knew from the theory of the rumen that if you could knock out the methane emissions, that there was this chance for a productivity uplift that is unique to the space. There haven't been products in the past for ruminants that work that way. So it's a novel process to tap into.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because I've kind of been aware of the space for a little while. Again, I haven't had anyone on the show who's ever talked about it. I've in my travels met a couple of companies, and it's not a. It's there's certainly other, like everything. There's other players in the space, but Number 8 Bio is the first company that I've encountered that said we're talking about a productivity problem, we're talking about an efficiency problem, and the emissions problem is a byproduct of that. And yes, we should solve that too. And it's great that we can do both of these within a single breath, but these things are attached to each other. They're not separable challenges. In fact, better to solve them together.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's how the best innovations go. Like if you look at the energy sector, solar and wind, for example, it was initially, it's too expensive and we're just doing this to green up the grid. But in the end, it's just turned out to be a good business decision. Like those things are cheaper and easier to set up than polluting systems. And I think you can view a lot of climate tech that way. Wasted emissions in the atmosphere are just wasted resources in every technology. So if you can tap into how to convert that into gains of some type, then that's the formula.
Interesting. So, that's so interesting. The only reason, I try not to get political on this show. We just like to look at the data and the science and where it's all going. But if you can reframe emissions as an inefficiency of an energy system, any energy system, and say, well, if there's something that did add less emissions, it's in high likelihood it has higher energetic efficiency. Now, It might not have, if coal's super, super cheap, it might have lower economic efficiency, right, as it might be cheaper to do coal. But if you purely look at it from an energy efficiency system, that's a really interesting way to frame it. I haven't heard that.
Yeah, well, I mean, CO2 is a resource. It's a potential resource ultimately, right? And it's just how do you economically tap into it and use it for something useful?
Yeah, interesting. So, look, that's a good segue. Like, one of the questions I always like to get to is, and I agree with your point entirely, unless you work out how to make these things compelling from an economic perspective, they never get to where they need to go to, right? They just, no one, despite what certain sides of politics will tell you, really virtue signals with their wallet. Very, very few people will do that, and very few organisations or companies will do it because their obligations as a director or a shareholder, or a manager rely on it. So let's help me understand the economics here. You've talked about 20 cents a day to have this thing. Help me understand how that looks in the larger economic picture for someone, say, grazing cattle or growing goats.
Yeah, it's really, really simple. So we endeavour to work out what the productivity change is for a producer, and the numbers will vary according to where the system is and how it works and that type of thing. But we can step through an example, which might be that we've delivered our bolus to a grazing beef system, and we've enabled the animals to grow, let's call it 10% more efficiently. So you can work out from that whether they're getting just more weight gain, or they're getting more weight gain for less grass and pasture intake, and what that is will change how this works. But as an illustrative example, we might improve their feed efficiency 10% in the future, and they can stock therefore 10% more animals on the same area of land, and get all of those extra kilograms when they sell them to the processor. So you work out the value of that over the time period that they received the product, and then you can price it generally a half to a third of what that value is for this to be uptaken.
Right. And so when you sell the product to a producer or a producer, let's call them that, there's an element of having to go through the business case with them to help them understand what it might be and then prices in proportion to that, rather than just, hey, how many animals you got? I got 1,000. Great. Well, it's 20,000
Well,
cents a day.
There is and there isn't. So we're just coming out of like a lot of university studies and prototype development, and we're just starting to go into commercial trials early next year. And our expectation is that we won't have to uniquely do this for every single producer, but we probably will have to do it for Brahman breeds in the north of Australia, and for Angus in the south, and for animals that receive a little bit of grain and those that don't. So there's a bit of nuance in animal ag that really does matter for the outcome. So we will have to do trials in those systems and prove out exactly what the value proposition is. But after we've done that, we don't need to do it forever. We can use those case studies to show other producers.
Got it. And so your economic model is still to sell per unit, per head, per day, whatever. But to get it to market, you absolutely need to understand the economics of this initially.
Partly. So there's another whole side of this which we haven't spoken about yet. So we're working on carbon insetting, which is different to carbon offsetting. So with carbon offsetting, you get to reduce your emissions or get money. You can't have both because you sell the emissions reduction to someone else, right? So carbon insetting is a different emerging mechanism where in our examples at Number8 Bio, we might have a beef producer who's using our better feed product to reduce their emissions. And they might have someone downstream of them in the supply chain that retails beef, like a supermarket or a burger chain, for example. Those big corporate entities might have climate goals, and they want to have a rigorous emissions reduction claim for their carbon accountants, their banks, their insurers, their governments, whatever it happens to be in the future. So with carbon insetting, what happens is the producer does the intervention, they reduce their emissions. Their scope 1 emissions are the retailer's scope 3 emissions. The retailer pays for the emissions reduction, and Number8 Bio returns those funds to the farmer. And everyone claims the emissions reduction in the supply chain. So it strengthens the supply chain rather than weakening it, and the farmer gets the reduction and the money at the same time. So we're aiming to do that as well. But long term and fundamentally, it is the productivity uplift that we expect will support the products into the distant future.
Yeah, so the economic argument for this isn't, hey, as long as we've got carbon trading, we'll be okay. It's we're going to make more beef, right? And we're going to make more beef for less inputs.
Yep.
So clearly there's an upside here, but there's an economic argument in the short to medium term about the carbon aspect.
That's right. So I think carbon trading will continue into the medium-term future at the very least. But even within that paradigm, it's the products that do have their own separate value proposition that will succeed, even within carbon trading.
Yeah, we had a chat to Tony Pan from Modern Hydrogen a while back, and he was talking about feeding like a gas peaker plant that's being used next to, say, I don't know, like a steel plant or something like that. So it's a dedicated industrial heat and energy, and they are feeding that natural gas into that peaker plant, but they're putting it through one of their kind of shipping containers, and it basically uses a chemical process to turn it into hydrogen and pulls the carbon out, and it turns it into a carbon substrate that they then sell to people who build roads who need really fine carbon particulate matter to put in bitumen. And yes, there's great carbon credits available for the whole thing because it takes the carbon that would otherwise just be exhumed from the stack of the peaker plant. But in reality, what they're doing is creating two inputs that they can sell on the way through from an existing paradigm. There's a lot of good parallels here for this in terms of introduced change, that is systems level change that actually improves the quality of the system and the outputs from the inputs already there without having to completely rewire the whole system.
Yeah, no, I love it. Exactly. That's where hope lies, in my opinion.
That's very, very lovely and warm mission statement. It's where hope lies. I feel like I could have that on a T-shirt, on an ambition poster in the back. So let's come from that lofty high peak. I want to understand, there's been a few turns. You've raised some money a while back and then gone down literally a rabbit hole and been like a dead end.
Yeah.
I want to understand your challenges in bringing this to market. Like, obviously, you've talked through some of those. We can go into more color on those. But as you actually get now to the point where some of the science seems to be settled, like, talk me through some of the challenges in really bringing this to market. Like, where are you up to right now?
Yeah, there's a few challenges for us to get really scalable adoption. There are manufacturing challenges. The active ingredient itself is relatively simple to make, but we have to formulate into this thing called a bolus, which I think I've probably talked about but haven't explained. It's a large pill, essentially, that sits in the rumen for several months and slowly releases the active ingredient over
Right.
time so that the animals can be out consuming pasture and still have their efficiency increased and their methane
And it has
decreased.
to be in their stomach for it to work.
That's right. Yeah. Yep. So it's
Can't
a
put it into the bloodstream or something like that.
no. It's a microbial fermentation that has to be altered. So yeah, it has to be in the stomach where the microbes are. Um, but yeah, anyway, that's getting the we have to make a cylinder essentially. We have to get powders and compress them into a cylinder and coat it with a biodegradable coating, which sounds really simple, and it kind of is. But the details of scaling that up to thousands per day are challenging. That's something that we're navigating at the moment.
Interesting.
Yep. Otherwise, we've got really good plans to do commercial trials, and we have a cohort of good partners emerging to help us do that. Once we
Mm.
have demonstrated value in commercial, like farming settings, we then need to get scalable distribution. It's not a feasible situation for a little startup like Number8 Bio to be supplying to the long tail of smaller farms, if that makes sense. So yeah, really, we need distribution partners as well, like rural stores and feed mills and that type of thing. So yeah,
Yeah.
those are the two big challenges in my mind.
And so this bolus thing, just to come bolus, have I got that
Mm.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
bolus,
When you
that's
said it
right.
the first time, I thought I was like something to do with Ebola. We'll come back to it.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with Ebola. So it's looking at it like a nicotine patch that sits on the outside of the animal that slowly releases it in isn't going to work, right?
Nah. It's more like a slow release like pill basically that dissolves over 6 months in the stomach.
And is that because you can't? It's not practical to feed this thing to them every single day.
Yeah. A lot of farming systems, nothing is fed to the animals. They're out just grazing pasture for many months, so
Wow.
you can't give them a feed additive, right? The normal route for feed additives is to be mixed into grains or supplements of some other type that are fed
Because
to the animals. But if they just eat grass, it's really hard to give them something like this. So
they
yeah,
don't. They're not coming in for their daily
exactly,
chicken feed. Yeah, interesting. I never thought
exactly.
about that.
Yep.
Okay, and like I'm obviously not going to solve it. I don't understand the space at all. But when you think about how you solve this bolus issue, are there parallels of what you're looking for? Maybe either in other animal delivery systems or in other contexts entirely, where something needs to be in a slow release. Is that kind of the fertile ground to try to solve this problem?
Yes, exactly. Boluses are existing products. They're not super common in Australia, but definitely
Mm,
in Europe, it's a really common format to deliver trace elements to
right.
animals that are grazing pasture that are deficient in those trace elements. So we're not inventing a novel format here. It's more of like
Yeah.
how do we configure it to be compatible with our active
Got
ingredient.
it. Got it. Okay,
Yeah,
cool. So the technology itself exists. It's just how do
yeah.
you get this thing at a price point to deliver the thing you need to deliver in the context you're delivering it, which is probably another 5,000 things at this time in running and 5,000 cows to work out which one lasted the amount of time it needs to last or something like that.
Yeah. Well, the R&D is separate, but we also have a physical scale up challenge of like making these boluses, and we have a factory in Sydney that can make
Yeah.
at the moment dozens per day, but we need to get that up sharply in the
Yeah.
future. Yeah.
Fascinating. And is it, would you say, is it, so if it's a manufacturing challenge, is it just a challenge of scale or is it a challenge of know-how or is it people or is it capital? Like what's the real barrier if you go a bit further
Yeah,
deeper?
a bit of know-how, a bit of capital, not very much. We're very capex light in the scheme of deep
Yeah.
tech. Yeah, not
Yeah.
nothing that would give anyone um, any
Nightmare.
issues, but yeah, it's mainly know-how. So yeah, we're in the process of working out how to do that at the moment, tapping into other
Yeah.
experts.
I love it. And then if we kind of look forward from here, so we're coming into the end of, by the time this comes out, it'll be end of November somewhere. Uh, like, what are these kind of these big milestones for you in 2026? And like, you know, like, yeah, like help me understand like the next 6 to 12 months for you guys.
Yes, so early 26, we're starting to do our first commercial trials with select partners that are
Yeah.
particularly interested in this space and proving out the product there, quantifying the emissions reductions in those systems.
Yeah.
And what we're doing there is generating a really rigorous abatement number that can feed into the carbon insetting mechanism that we're exploring with larger companies, so
Yeah.
that in the second half of 2026 we can launch more widely. And the value proposition at that point should be that we have a really rigorous productivity uplift and a really rigorous abatement claim and a mechanism
Yeah.
to have farmers incentivized and compensated for lowering their emissions. So
Yeah. And
it's all
probably within,
gearing up for that launch.
yeah, and then within the context of maybe a particular farming group, like you said, like a particular breed or in a particular region where
Yep.
the data is really well understood as a model for, great, now let's go to this particular breed of cow or change to a different animal and rinse and repeat.
That's right. And there's different target animal groups. So we're looking at weaner cattle and weaner sheep to begin with, because that's where we've seen our product work best in our university trials. But beyond that, we need to do larger cows that are on pasture, cows that are in cattle that are in feedlots, beef cows that are calving every year, and work out all of that stuff. So
Yeah.
it's a long road with ag products like this.
Oh yeah, you'll be here for decades. It's wonderful, and that's a good outcome, not a bad. Otherwise, you should finish shop in 2027, sit on the back porch and have a cold one. One question I do have to ask though, because you just talked right then about cows that are in feedlots.
Mm-hmm.
Why not go to the ones in feedlots first? And because you can feed them on a more regular basis.
Yep. Yeah, that would be easier. We've found our particular product works better on high forage diets, so it works better on grass. So we're going where we're going to work best.
Yeah, and is there something interesting in the science there as well about when you feed a cow in a lot, it's also getting a bunch of stuff that it would otherwise not. It's not getting a bunch of stuff it should be getting, and that may actually be problematic.
Yeah, well, there's a bit of science there. So feedlot cows are super efficient already. They're optimized to grow as fast as physically possible. They make quite a bit less methane than cattle do on pasture. So there's less room for improvement there to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then, we're still uncovering this, but there's some details in the mechanism of action for our particular product where it seems to upregulate bacteria that degrade grass and help the cow consume the grass. So there's something special going on there, but there's also the fact that feedlot animals are hyper efficient already.
Yeah, well, and my sort of thought was if you think about something like the cost of a range fed or pasture raised animal rather than a feedlot animal, there's a premium paid for it. There's an argument that the nutritional quality of that outcome is better as well, right? That beef is a better quality of beef than something that's in a feedlot. I'm arguing correlation and causation, obviously, right? But there's clearly something happening when you walk out and you actually eat grass and a whole range of different things, forager-led diet, I think it was the term you just used.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering whether there's any link between these parallels.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, it's probably down to personal preference and consumer perceptions on grass-fed, grain-fed. But personally, I love a high marble score Wagyu from a grain finished animal. But yeah, a lot of people love a really lean beef that's been on grass its whole life. So
I got it. Okay, those arguments are each way bet.
Yeah.
No problem. All right, that's wonderful. This is super, super interesting. And as I say a lot on this show, we often will catch a founder in a company kind of right at their inflection point. So I love it, and I love being able to sort of check back in on it. I do have a final question for you, which I'm now starting to ask everyone because it's leading to some interesting results. I want to understand your least favourite part of working on this problem and your favourite part of working on this problem.
Oh, that's interesting. I think there's probably two favourite parts for me. And I'm not sure about the least favourite, so I'll think about that while I answer the first part.
Sure.
But, yeah, my favourite part is the teamwork that we have. So one of the reasons I got frustrated with academia is that there wasn't real teamwork happening, and that's because of the way that academia is structured and the way that projects are funded. I had 17 people in my team, and they probably had 17 different projects, whereas in a startup everyone is so mission aligned because you're on a burning platform of venture capital. And if you don't reach your milestones, everyone's going to have to go and do something else pretty soon, right? So everyone is very well aligned, working on the same problem. There is just true, deep teamwork that happens, and I really love that.
Yeah.
I've also discovered I kind of like sales a little bit, which is really weird. So I didn't have to do that. as a career scientist.
That's normally in the least favourite bucket, by the way, but
yeah, and not in the sense of making money or flogging something, but trying to help someone that has a real problem, right? Like we've got a solution here, and I get a kick out of trying to work with people that buy into that solution. So that's been nice.
Sure.
What I don't like. I probably shouldn't say this, but I have to raise capital all the time, and it's a lot of work goes into investor calls. And it's not that I don't like it; it's just that I would rather be with my team or with customers.
Yeah. Raising capital. As I often say to people, if you don't need to do it, please don't do it. Find a way to market that doesn't involve doing it, so you can focus on your customers and your mission. What I'm going to take out of it, though, is that you didn't really have a negative one, and you had two positive ones. So you're obviously wonderfully optimistic about everything you're doing.
I think you have to be in this space.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If you don't toot your own horn, no one will. That kind of thing. That's amazing. Well, Tom, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Look, really, really stoked to hear about it. I've been hesitant about actually doing any interviews in this space because I really didn't understand it, and I couldn't understand some of the differentiation. And so I really appreciate you breaking down all the technology, the biology and everything that's going on, as well as some of the economic challenges with some of this. So I hope you guys absolutely crush it in the year ahead. Looks like you're on track. So, and thanks again for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Shape the System. As usual, if you'd like to suggest a guest, someone that you know who's helped change a system for the better, please go to www.shapethesystem.org, click on the top right-hand corner, then click Suggest Guest. Make sure that you click subscribe so that you get the new episode. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures. Connects founders to the services they need along their journey. Whether you are looking to refine your strategy, mature your finance function, prepare for a capital raise, expand abroad, or simply comply with regulatory requirements, they provide you with the support you need to drive your business forward.